History is often written by the victors, but sometimes the most powerful stories are found in the silences, the documents that have been ignored, and the voices that have been erased. Deep in the colonial archives of Spain, there is a royal order that should have changed everything we think we know about Mexico. On October 28, 1612, King Philip III of Spain issued a decree. It wasn't about a gold land conquest. Instead, it was a formal recognition of a community of escaped African slaves known as Maroons, who had built their own free settlement near what is now Veracruz, not far from Oaxaca. This decree didn't just acknowledge their existence, it granted them their freedom, their own town, and their own government. This single piece of paper, the Real Cedula of 1612, is a historical bombshell. It tells us that more than 200 years before Mexico officially abolished slavery, a powerful group of African rebels fought the Spanish Empire to a standstill and won. They forced the most powerful kingdom in the world to recognize their liberty. They were led by a man named Gaspar Yanga, an elder statesman who claimed to be of royal blood in Africa. His community, San Lorenzo de los Negros, became the first legally recognized free black town in the Americas. This wasn't a gift from a benevolent king. It was a concession won through decades of fierce resistance. This isn't just a dusty old story from 400 years ago. The erasure of this history has real and lasting consequences today, in the year 2025. In Mexico, the fight for recognition for Afro-Mexican communities has been a long and difficult one. For centuries, the official story of Mexico was that it was a nation born from the mixing of two cultures, the Spanish and the indigenous. This idea, known as mestizaje, completely left out the African part of the equation. It created a national identity that rendered millions of Afro-descendants invisible, both legally and culturally. Forgetting the Maroon alliances meant forgetting that black people were foundational actors in Mexico's history. The struggle for recognition is not just about identity, it's about fundamental rights. It was only in 2019 that the Mexican Constitution was amended to formally recognize Afro-Mexicans as a distinct ethnic group. This change grants them legal standing and makes them eligible for specific rights and protections, much like indigenous communities. This legal victory was the result of decades of activism by Afro-Mexican leaders who had to fight against the myth that they didn't exist. The history of Yanga and the Afro-Indigenous alliances is the historical proof they needed. It shows that their presence isn't new. It is as old as the colonial period itself. Understanding these alliances also helps us see the deep connections between black and indigenous communities today. In places like the Costa Chica region of Oaxaca and Guerrero, these communities have lived side by side for centuries. They have shared land, culture, music, and family ties. When we ignore their shared history of resistance, we misunderstand their present-day relationships. The fight against discrimination, the struggle for land rights, and the push for cultural preservation are often shared struggles. The historical alliances of the past provide a powerful model for collaboration and solidarity in the present. Ultimately, uncovering this history is about telling a more complete and honest story of what Mexico is. It challenges us to look beyond the simple narratives we were taught in school, and to see the complexity and diversity that has always been there. It enriches the national identity by adding a crucial chapter of resilience, freedom, and cooperation. The story of the Maroon alliances is not just black history or indigenous history, it is Mexican history. And by bringing it into the light, we honor the ancestors who fought for freedom and empower their descendants who continue to fight for justice and recognition today. To unlock this buried history, we can't rely on the mainstream historical accounts. They are too often silent on the matter. Instead, we must become historical detectives, piecing together the story from scattered clues left behind in the archives. These clues are the fragments that the official story tried to forget. In our investigation, 3 key pieces of evidence stand out. They are like keys that unlock different rooms of this hidden past, each revealing a new dimension of the Afro-Indigenous alliances that flourished in the mountains and coasts of Oaxaca and its surrounding regions. Each piece of evidence challenges the official narrative in its own powerful way. The first key is a document, the Real Cedula of 1612, which we've already touched upon. This royal decree is our foundational proof. It's the smoking gun, an official admission from the Spanish crown itself that an organized group of escaped Africans had created a free territory. But we will look closer at its specific language, the terms of the agreement. What did the Spanish demand, and what did Yanga's people win? This document is more than just a recognition of freedom. It's a treaty born of conflict, and its details tell us just how powerful and organized these Maroons truly were. It's the official record of a successful rebellion. The second key is a personal testimony, a voice from the past that speaks directly to us. It comes from the trial records of an indigenous man named Marcos, who was captured by the Spanish in the 16th century. His confession, recorded under duress by a colonial court, describes in detail the networks of cooperation between his community and the local Maroons. He speaks of shared hideouts, of trading food and information, and of joint raids against Spanish settlements. This testimony provides the human element, showing us that these alliances weren't just abstract political strategies. They were built on personal relationships and mutual survival. The third and final key is a map. But it's not a map that shows Spanish cities or colonial roads. It's a map of resistance. By cross-referencing colonial-era maps with descriptions of Maroon settlements, historian Jean-Pierre Tardieu has helped reconstruct the secret geography of these alliances. These maps show how Maroon communities, known as palenques, were strategically located in remote, difficult-to-access areas, often bordering indigenous territories. They were positioned along mountains and rivers that connected the interior of Oaxaca to the coast, creating a hidden network that was invisible to the Spanish, but essential for the survival and communication of the rebels. Together, these three keys, the decree, the testimony, and the map, will allow us to rebuild a history that was almost lost forever. Let's pause here for a moment and really consider what this means. The Spanish Empire, the most powerful force in the 16th and 17th centuries, did not crush this rebellion. It negotiated. It signed a treaty. This wasn't an act of mercy. It was an act of political necessity. We have to ask ourselves, what kind of power did Gaspar Yanga and his allies wield to force the hand of a king? It wasn't just the power of a few hundred warriors hiding in the mountains. It was the power of a sophisticated, organized, and interconnected society that threatened the very foundations of the colonial project. This was, in effect, a kingdom within an empire, a free kingdom built by those who were supposed to be enslaved. This community had its own leadership, its own military strategies, and its own foreign policy, which involved making treaties with some indigenous groups. They had created a functional, alternative society that operated outside of Spanish control. The royal decree of 1612 was not the creation of their freedom. It was the moment the Spanish were finally forced to admit that this free society already existed and that they were powerless to destroy it. Our second key to this hidden world comes from a more personal and perhaps more chilling source, a colonial court record. In the Archivo General de Indias, the same archive that holds the royal decrees, there are thousands of trial documents. One of them, from the late 16th century, details the interrogation of an indigenous man named Marcos from Coatzacoalcos, on the borderlands of Oaxaca and Veracruz. He had been accused of camarilla, not of being a Maroon himself, but of aiding and abetting them. His forced confession, extracted under the threat of torture, gives us a rare, ground-level view of how these Afro-Indigenous alliances actually worked. According to the trial transcript, Marcos confessed that he and others from his village regularly provided food, such as maize and beans, to the nearby Maroon settlement. He described the Palenque not as a crude hideout, but as an established village, with families and fortifications. In exchange for the food, the Maroons offered protection. They used their military skills to defend the indigenous village from Spanish slavers and abusive landowners. This was a symbiotic relationship, a partnership based on mutual need and a shared enemy. The Maroons had the fighting power. The indigenous communities had the agricultural knowledge and control of the land. Marcos's voice, filtered through the hostile record of a colonial scribe, gives us a precious human glimpse into the daily reality of a forbidden alliance. Our third and final key is not a single document, but a method of seeing the landscape itself as a historical text. By combining colonial-era maps with written descriptions of Maroon settlements, Jean-Pierre Tardieu and Ben Vincent III and other historians have pieced together a map of resistance. This countermap reveals a hidden geography that existed parallel to the Spanish colonial world. It shows that the locations of the palenques in and around Oaxaca were not random. They were chosen with incredible strategic intelligence. often in rugged, inaccessible mountain ranges like the Sierra Madre del Sur. Steep cliffs, dense forests, and winding rivers made it nearly impossible for Spanish militias to launch a surprise attack. These locations were often on the borders between different jurisdictions or in areas home to indigenous communities resisting Spanish rule. The Maroons placed themselves in the gaps of colonial power. They built free communities in spaces the Spanish could not control. This geography of resistance was the foundation of their freedom. Looking at this reconstructed map, we see a pattern. The Palenques formed a network along the Pacific coast, from Huatulco in Oaxaca to Guerrero and beyond. Hidden trails, communication, trade, and mutual support. This was not a collection of isolated hideouts, it was an archipelago of freedom, linked communities forming a front against the colonial regime. The echoes of these forgotten alliances are not confined to the pages of history. They are alive today, woven into the cultural fabric and the very DNA of the people of Oaxaca's Costa Chica. This legacy is visible in the faces of the people, in the rhythm of the music, and in the ongoing political struggles for recognition and justice. The 2019 constitutional recognition of Afro-Mexicans was a monumental step, but only the beginning of a longer journey. That legal victory stands on communities identifying as both Black and Indigenous for centuries. But a haunting question remains. What other truths are waiting to be found? What other kingdoms of resistance? What other buried stories? The search must continue. In forgotten archives and silenced memories may lie keys to a more just future.